Okay, so let's begin. Let me introduce you first. Thank you for doing this
Mhm.
interview with Metalstorm Websyn.
No worries.
We are with Dr. Mark Deeks, a PhD holder in heavy metal of all subjects.
Yeah.
Um, Also piano teacher, composer, choir arranger, I mean, many different things. And keyboard player in Winterfilleth, and behind the kind of solo project of Arth.
That's right.
Uh, so I don't know if I missed anything.
I mean, that sounds like an average day.
Do you have time for all of this?
No? Well, perhaps we should ask my wife. I don't know. We we try.
Okay. So let's begin with Arth, which is like also the band that I wrote a review about for your second album, the one that came out in April.
Hmm.
Um, Tell us about this first, about this project. How did it come about?
Um, I think the thing with Arth was just really an excuse to be musically selfish for a change. I've spent my life as what I would refer to as a working musician, which means I spend my life teaching other people to play instruments and running choirs and working as musical director for projects. And so you tend to spend your time facilitating other people's music and making other people's musical taste happen. Um, and like any sort of profession where you make a living out of what is your hobby or what to other people is a hobby, um, sometimes the dividing line, can get a little blurry as to when stuff is fun and when stuff is a job, and that dividing line can become a little unclear. So obviously, I've been in Winterfilleth now for 10 years, and um, I love being in Winterfilleth. I consider the guys like brothers, but even in a band, there is always an element of compromise between five people. So I just wanted a little corner of the musical universe where I could just squirrel away and do exactly as I wanted and not have to answer to anyone, and just make something that was a personal representation of who I am. So yeah, Arth is what came out.
Okay. And the style of music you play, you call it monastic doom, which is, I mean, I
the
think
rec-
it's very,
the record the record label call it monastic too.
Okay. I thought it was your idea.
No, I mean, I said it was okay. I mean, I think I laughed the first time they, they
I
told
think
me, but
it's very fitting. Don't you agree?
yeah, yeah, no, it is. I'm just not massively a fan of labels like that because they can sometimes be a bit. You know what metal fans are like. We get very passionate about defending
The
what is
genre.
or yeah, what is or what isn't allowed in a certain genre. So, obviously, the term monastic, um, whilst with the first album was about a saint and a monk, um, and the second album is about someone who was both a saint and a king. I might choose to write about other characters from Northumbrian history that weren't monks or saints, and I don't want to
Right.
get pinned down into that. So I think they've even used on an advert for this one Royal Monastic Doom for this one because Oswald was the king as well. So I understand. I'm not complaining. That Prophecy being a fantastic label to sign to, the perfect label for Arth, and but yeah, these pigeonholes, they do make me smile sometimes. So who knows what form of doom will come out next? But yeah, that's what we've got right now.
Well, I mean, labels have to do that in a way because you get
Of
so
course,
much flow of new bands coming in all different genres.
of course,
So they're trying, to provide information that would make a band stand out from the rest of the pack. And I
sure.
think your sound is, I think the sound is quite, I don't know, liturgical, ecclesiastic. I don't know how to describe it. So it's kind of like do metal that you could listen to in a church type of thing,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah. No.
it's not a religious,
No.
you're
No.
not a it's not a religious band, but you can get what I mean.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's why the term has kind of stuck in that it suggests two things. It suggests that the lyrics might be about monastic matters,
Hmm.
but of course, when people say the word monastic, they already have a sound in their mind as to what the vocals might sound like, as to what the music might sound like, and there is an element of that in the sound as well. So no, it's I'm used to it now. Monastic doom it is.
So when you started art, did you expect it to be so successful, as it had been so far? Because I think the reception has been grand for your project.
Yeah, I mean, no, I hadn't literally zero expectations. I think that it's a cliche for bands to say that they have made the music for themselves, and if anyone else likes it, it's a bonus. But that was 100% how I approached it. I had, there was no record label, there was no fan base, there was no expectations. There was just me sat here making music and enjoying myself until I was satisfied. Working and working and working until I was satisfied with what came out. Um, and when I signed to Prophecy, I said to Martin, the boss, if we sell 100 copies of this, I'll be astonished. It's such a niche sound and such a niche subject matter, and it's about a part of the world that most people haven't heard of. I had no reason to expect that. I know what metal fans are like. Metal fans can be pretty brutal sometimes, and so no, I really made it for my own pleasure and my own enjoyment and my own satisfaction. And so I think when the first album came out, there was an element of surprise, like there is with any new band. That when a new band comes out and people are like, oh, what's this? And I think people were sort of quite quickly deciding one way or the other whether they really liked it or whether this just wasn't for them. And thankfully a lot of people really liked it. We've sold way more records than I ever imagined possible, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm having a great time.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad. So since you mentioned the subject matter, the name art means something along the lines of national identity or something like that. Is that
It
correct?
sort of. It
Oh,
basically means you're talking about the land where you're from.
all right.
So it means my native land.
Oh, my native
So
land. Okay.
yeah, the land which I am from. Yeah,
All right. And you also have your PhD thesis is the title is National I've written it down because I can't remember it. National Identity in Northern and Eastern European Heavy Metal. Is that
yeah,
correct?
yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So I have to ask, what urged you to write about a subject like this?
I think that it started from like a lot of metal fans. I've been listening to metal for 30 years or more, and we've all seen a sort of, I guess you could call it a trend, but let's call it an explosion because trend sounds like a negative word. Of bands who have taken elements of history and of mythology and poetry and incorporated it some way into the music. So you're sat wearing a Bathory shirt. Bathory did that, but then you also have bands like Drukt from Ukraine, or Primordial from Ireland, or a Monomarth from Sweden. Bands who have made very different sounding records and very different sounding music, but have a thread in common, which is that they're all representing where they're from in some way. And whether it's just taking elements of poetry or mythology and incorporating it into the lyrics, or whether it's taking old paintings and using them as the album covers, as Bathory would be an example of that,
Hmm.
or whether it's taking literally old folk music and incorporating that into the music, like the Faroe Islands band Tyr have done. I
Hmm.
just think it's a really interesting subject when bands from different parts of the world have, on the surface, done the same thing, but we've ended up with all of these very different sounding records. And yeah, I found it quite interesting this idea that musicians represent where they're from in some way, and traced it back to classical music of a lot of classical composers from previous centuries who did similar things. So put it in that kind of context. But then from my point of view, because I'm a music theory geek and I used to lecture in music theory, I was kind of interested how when, for example, rock magazines will use expressions in reviews or interviews like the Finnish sound
Hmm.
or the Ukrainian sound, and my music theory brain would say, I don't believe there's such a thing because we only have 12 notes to play with. How could anything sound Finnish? And so my brain would be kind of curious about that. But then, of course, as a metal fan, I'd be going, well, yeah, I think I can tell you that band sounds like from Finland. But then my argument was kind of, um, does it sound Finnish, or have I been given enough information for me to just accept what I'm told? So if I see a painting of a mountain and someone tells me that mountain is in Finland, then do I listen to the record and go, yes, this sounds Finnish? Whereas if someone had told me the mountain was from Scotland, would I have been convinced that the record sounded Scottish? I don't know. I just find it kind of interesting that there's a concept in sociology called the imagined community, which means we believe that we have something in common because we're from the same place or we are into the same things, like people who all support the same football team or people who all follow the same band. They believe that they are the same on the surface, but of course, like any cross section of humanity, they have all very different people in lots of different ways. So yeah, I'm a real geek for this kind of stuff. I find it really interesting. But specifically with this music, how can I represent where I'm from in the music?
So you kind of try to show and to represent, to show yourself, to demonstrate yourself as coming from Northumbria. Is that right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that
yeah.
the music
Northumbria. Yeah.
is connected with where you come from.
Yeah, I believe so. I think a lot of people will say that they're very passionate about where they're from, and certainly people in the northeast of England are very well known for being passionate about where they're from. Um, and I just think that even on the surface, this part of England has a huge history of battles, of religion. There are loads of castles and dramatic coastline and beautiful countryside and the battle between Christianity and pagan history. There's all kinds of tales that most heavy metal bands like to write about.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like such a perfect fit. And I remember when I was sort of thinking about what subject to write the first album about, and the tale of St. Cuthbert, who was essentially a monk whose bones were carried in a coffin around the region for 100 years. Well, that is doom metal as anything. You can't get more doom metal than that. Like monks carrying a coffin for a century.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So, so yeah, I just it seemed a perfect fit.
yeah. I have a T-shirt which says "Doom Metal crowd surfing," and it shows the four people carrying a coffin. I think it's a fantastic T-shirt, one of my favorite T-shirts.
Is that a band?
No, it's just a T-shirt that's been made for. I'll send you a picture on the Messenger
That is
later.
fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's a very good one.
yeah.
Were you at all worried, because we live in this time and age, talking about where you come from or the land you come from or things like cultural identity or things like these things can be misinterpreted, depending
Yeah,
on your
I
tone
know.
and how you express them. Were you at all worried that people might take things the wrong way? What you're trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been around heavy metal long enough to know that these things are part of the discussion, and I knew that I was making this project from a starting point that was nothing to do with those kind of subjects, that how they may be interpreted. I knew this was purely, almost a factual
Mm.
stories that I'm telling. I'm not creating any new history. They're just purely historical tales. Um, I might challenge the religious narrative a little bit in terms of encouraging people to have a questioning mind about the stories that we're told in history, and who controls the narrative controls history, right? There's a kind of idea that whoever writes history down, is the victor, is the winner, and so that becomes history. That becomes accepted as fact. So, for example, the example I give for this album is that Oswald, who the new album's about, is presented as like this really holy man, a saint, a king, a very humble man who brought Christianity to England, and what a great guy. And he may well have been a great guy. How do I know? But he, the only real text that's written about that era is by a guy called Bede. The book is called Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People. Well, that is a Christian book, essentially. It's written by Bede, who was a religious scholar. And so he, in his book, will always present the Christian characters as the good guys. It's like Star Wars, right? And the pagan kings as the bad guys who must be conquered. So we have to remember that who was writing that down, because I'm sure that history is a little bit more nuanced than that. It's not just as simple as good versus bad, right? So the example I give is that at the end of the album, when Oswald is killed in battle, we believe that happened in a place called Oswestry. It's now known as Oswestry in England. Well, that is way further south than Northumbria. That's not in Northumbria. So if he was in a battle that is nowhere near Northumbria, my question to you would simply be, what was he doing there?
Okay.
That doesn't sound like a very Christian thing to do. Perhaps he was on the rampage trying to take over another kingdom. The simple fact is we don't know. But the texts that are written down are written by a Christian scholar. So it's presented as just he's this great noble warrior, and he just so happened to be somewhere else. But so I encourage people to have a questioning mind. But this is nothing to do with race or anything, or it's just purely historical tales, like many other bands have done. But yeah, believe me, I know what this leads to, and I know the questions I get asked, and I know the messages I get on social media about what this must mean that I'm like, or what this must mean that I believe, and I know it's all bollocks. It's not true. But
Yeah, I mean, it's
people on
because many
social
people.
media are people on social media.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean because there's many people who just, just scrape the surface. They have no time, or they make no effort to dig a little bit deeper, and
Exactly.
it's very easy to just denounce something and move on
Exactly.
instead of actually, investigating something further
Exactly.
and try to find out what the other person is trying to tell me.
And
Um,
kind of the example I give people is that I have been accused of being a Catholic and also being accused of being a Nazi. Now that's obviously like the two extremes, and I've had everything else in between. But that kind of suggests that I've got the balance quite quite right.
yeah.
Because if I'm neither one extreme or the other, then I must be somewhere in the middle. But it's kind of fascinating to me that people can hear the same record with the same lyrics and come to two such drastically different conclusions. Like you say, just scraping the surface and just assuming the rest.
All
I think
right.
that says a lot for people.
So, moving on, I would like to ask you about the organic doom concert that you had. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And if you're willing to repeat that, because I mean, the news that I got was that it was a very successful event.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was an idea for a project by some friends of Winterfilleth and I, a guy called Mark Minette, who is a producer. He's just produced the last couple of My Dying Bride records. And he, in his day job, works at the University of Huddersfield. He'd come across a project or an organisation that were looking to bring the pipe organ in front of new audiences because it's considered a bit of a dying art. Very classical in nature, an old elderly audience, which is obviously getting smaller. And so they wanted to find ways to incorporate the pipe organ with new audiences and new music. And Mark had suggested Arth as being a perfect way to do this. It has organ on the first record. It has themes that are fitting in terms of being performed by pipe organ, in terms of both the music and the lyrics. And he's a huge fan of the first record, so he proposed that we could be the band to help make this happen. I mean, I'll be honest and say I never thought it was going to happen when he mentioned it to me, because that just sounds like something that's very expensive. And I couldn't
Was it?
imagine that.
Was it
Well,
expensive in the end?
so yes, in some ways, but there was some funding that helped pay towards it, because basically it was seen as a situation that everyone won. So these kind of arts funding organizations that
Mm.
are there to support arts initiatives and keep arts and culture alive, and so on. There was some funding that was secured to help pay towards the cost of getting it all together. The pipe organ organization were happy because they got their new audience. Art was happy because we got to play an amazing venue with live pipe organ. We got to get it recorded, etc. Yeah, there was some costs associated with the recording and so on, but yeah, we essentially got a completely unique live album, and something really for the memory banks. We got 300 people there on a Monday evening, which was extraordinary. So yeah.
Are you thinking of repeating that concert, of doing it again? Is that even possible?
Not right now. I can't imagine. I know that Mark and some of his other projects have been doing some performances with other bands and the organ, but I think part of me just wants to keep it as like a special one-off, just because it's kind of like the perfect storm in terms of how everything aligned and everything came
Mm-hmm.
together. And yeah, it's not a cheap thing to do. I mean, it was a big venue,
Mm.
recording costs. Had we not been able to secure the arts organization funding that we did, there's no way we could have done it. So I think that it's great to have that memory. It's great to have the bonus disc and the DVD on the deluxe edition of the new album. And yeah, who knows? But I'm open to it. If anyone would like to make it happen, help make it happen again, then great. But yeah, it's not the easiest thing to pull together for sure.
Okay. If I remember correctly, you had Aaron from My Dying Bride as a guest vocalist there.
So
Um,
not as a vocalist, as a narrator.
as a narrator. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah. So
right.
which was as a My Dying Bride fan, crazy. I
Mm.
mean, who gets a narrator at a metal show, let alone Aaron Stainthorpe? So
Yeah.
yeah,
To be
crazy.
honest, when listening to the album and your music in general, I find many similarities to My Dying Bride, but like the melodies, the atmosphere, it feels like a lot like melodic death doom metal, but without the growls, with monastic vocals. So I think there's a. I also think you had the release day for the second album the same day as My Dying Bride, if I'm not mistaken.
So My Dying Bride album came out a week
A
before
week
the
later,
North
okay,
album.
yeah,
Yeah, but we,
yeah,
we did a joint signing session at Dark Earth Records near Liverpool. We did an
okay.
event together. Myself and Aaron did an event together.
I think it's fantastic to have have a fan, being a fan of a band, and then sharing the stage with them.
Yeah.
I I don't know how that must feel great in a
Yeah,
way.
it was very surreal experience. I remember, I think you could even sort of see it sometimes on the DVD of the Organic Doom show, that when I'm playing, out of the corner of my eye, I can see Aaron just crouched down at the side of the stage watching, and
Okay.
my brain just going, "Oh, this is wild. I mean, what is even going on here?" So yeah, I've been buying My Dying Bride records for a long time, My Dying Bride records, and yeah, it's crazy, to now we've stayed in contact, and um even like just the ridiculousness of, because his name begins AA, he's the first name in my phone book now. So
Okay.
every time I open my phone book, I'm looking at Aaron Stainthorpe's name and go, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And of course he's super humble and super friendly, and he doesn't see it like I see it as a fan, but everyone understands what it's like to to get to know, the idea about meeting your heroes or meeting people you've looked up to or whose music you enjoy. It's a bit strange at first, yeah, for sure.
So you didn't know each other from before in any
No, no,
way. Ah, okay.
no.
If I was going to ask you, like, who would you like to share with? Who would you like to share the stage with? Which artists? Like, you can name anyone you want. Who would you
Mm.
choose?
So I'm going to get to tick another one off in September because it may will come as no surprise talking about My Dying Bride that one of my other great loves of Paradise Lost.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, mine
so
too.
that's not that can't be a big surprise. So Paradise Lost are playing the Prophecy Fest in Germany in September, the same day as Art's playing. So as a big fan of Paradise Lost since I was a teenager, that's going to be really cool. Um, I guess that I don't know. There are some bands that I have a real love for that aren't necessarily of the same style, but I feel like share a similar soul or share a similar atmosphere. So the Finnish folk band Tenhi, who are also signed to Prophecy, I'm a huge fan of their music. I think I feel a real affinity with their music somehow, and also Cowan, Kauan.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
a
I know
huge
that
fan.
band. I also thought that I found similarities with them to them with your music in a way.
Well, I mean, I'll take that as a huge compliment because I think they're real masters of their craft. So
Yeah, they're really
yeah,
great. I like them a lot. Yeah.
they are some bands that I think sort of share a little bit of the soul. I think.
Hmm. And if you were to choose like a desert island album, which would that be?
Oh,
I know.
it's
It's a very bad question, but I ask
it's
everyone that.
it's the impossible question, isn't it? I mean, the record that I've probably loved for the longest is Alice in Chains' "Dirt."
Okay, surprising choice, I have to say.
I mean, that's I consider it, probably one of the top three records of all time, easily. I've
Okay.
been obsessed by that record since I was sort of 16, and
Well, we're very close age-wise, so I can understand that everything that you like, sound-wise, are things that I also used to like. That I very much like that. I love My Dying Bride and Paradise Lost. We grew up with that stuff.
yeah, yeah,
Um, have you found yourself, changing musical taste as you get older?
yeah, definitely.
In what way?
Particularly in the last few years. So my kind of I have a real appetite, or I have historically had a real appetite for finding new music all the time, music that I've never heard before. And often that would be new bands, new bands, new bands, new bands, new bands, new records, the latest releases. And I've just been obsessed for the best part of 25 to 30 years of that possibility that that band that I've never heard of might have made the greatest record of all time, and I just haven't heard it yet. And
Mm,
so constantly pressing play on something that I don't have familiarity with because it just might be the best. Um, but in the last few years, I found that my passion for doing that has kind of grown weary, and I've really returned to the bands that I've loved for a long time, or bands that were from a long time ago that I didn't hear, because I feel like an awful lot of modern metal music has lost what I can only describe as the soul of what I love about metal. And I find that probably 80 to 90% of the music I listen to was made before the year 2000. I don't listen to much modern music now. I think that when I was in the studio making the new record with Marcus from Imperium, who produced it, we were talking a lot, obviously, about, we were there for hours and hours talking about things, and I was talking about how I reckon that if I never heard another record again that was made before 1980 or after 1995, I'd probably be comfortable with that, because I've kind of just, even when it's bands that I've never heard of or have never heard before, if they were from that period, I usually can find something that I enjoy in it, because there's that youthful energy when metal was first new and or growing, like the sort of teenage years of metal, when bands were making exciting new records. They were just starting out. The production might not have been all that great, but there was a soul about it. And even if it's not music that I desperately love, there's still that energy about it. And now, even bands that I have historically loved, I feel are putting out records that, yeah, I mean, it's okay, it's good, like, but I don't hear that energy about it. And also, sometimes I joke with my friends that I reckon most bands make their best records within the first 3 to 5 records. There are some bands, of course, there are exceptions, but by the time a band is 6, 7, 8 records in, how many great records do we tend to get? Now, of course, like I love Iron Maiden, right? So Iron Maiden are still making what I consider to be some great records, but there aren't many bands who are still making great records at that stage of their career. I still think Paradise Lost are making great records. I still think My Dying Bride are making some great records, but they are the exception to the rule. Most bands who are 10 albums in, I just want to listen to the first 4 again.
Yeah, and I
perhaps I'm
mean, this
perhaps
is
I'm just
why.
getting old fashioned and grumpy old man, right?
Yeah, that makes two of us. Um, yeah, I know what you mean. Uh, it depends on how you search. I still do think that exciting metal still comes out in a way, but from younger bands, so from new
Yeah,
bands.
yeah, absolutely.
But it's like I mean, I've discussed it with other people too. I think that what is mainly changing is the fact that there's so much music available out there.
Yeah,
Everyone can put out anything they want with very low budget and very
and no
easily.
one to tell them not to.
Oh no, yeah,
No
yeah,
one to
of
tell them not.
course.
No one to bring out the quality control and go, try
Uh,
harder. Like a band I've got huge respect for, Bull Thrower. Right, I
yeah,
love, I love Bull
yeah,
Thrower.
yeah,
And
yeah,
what did Bull Thrower do when they gave up? They basically said, we can't make a better record
yeah,
than our last record. Therefore, why would we even try?
yeah, yeah.
And I
That's a
just went, and I
fantastic
just
way of
went, yeah,
thinking. Yeah, yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
That
yeah.
self awareness was brilliant.
And this is why they're so big, and everyone respects them because they literally retired on a high, at
Yeah,
their peak. It was their peak
exactly,
when they retired.
exactly.
And no one does that anymore. I
It
guess.
takes
But
it takes self control and self awareness.
to be honest, I mean, when you get to a point where you're older and famous, so if you were like as big as Metallica, for example, who is really going to tell you that you need to stop or that you need to trim, the duration of your tracks? Because you're going to say, go fuck off. We're Metallica. We
Yeah,
can do whatever we want, and
yeah.
then you release records just for the sake of releasing them, in a way.
Sometimes when I go to like add to cart on a website, my brain goes, "Do I really need a 15th album by this band?"
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And sometimes the answer is yes. But sometimes I go, no. Like for example, like I love Creator, right? But in
Mm.
reality, I don't need to listen to anything after the first 4 Creator albums, and I'll be quite happy. I love Destruction. Do I really need to listen to the second half of Destruction's catalog? No, because the first half's better. Like I could go through 100 bands that I feel like that about, and I'm not deliberately doing it to make a point. I just think most bands, the first half of their catalog is better than the second half.
It might have to do as well with the fact that, the early sound is more familiar to your ear because
Maybe, yeah,
you were
sure,
there when it came out. So it gives you a completely different feel to someone who is today, for example, 20 years old and listens to the first two or three
sure,
Creator
yeah.
albums. It's different
It's
to live in the
nostalgia, isn't
actual
it?
era when this came out, I think.
Yeah, it's nostalgia. We
Also,
feel we feel nostalgic about the albums that we grew up with. Like I know that Sound of White Noise isn't the best Anthrax album, but it's possibly my favorite Anthrax album because that's the Anthrax album that I got into Anthrax with. Do you know what I mean? Like we get attached to those albums that are the formative albums of like, who else could I like, Judas Priest, like,
Yeah,
or the whatever was the first album you got into the
yeah,
band you discovered. Like, for example, Megadeth, like Countdown to Extinction was the band that I got into Megadeth with because of my age. I know Rust in Peace is technically a better album, and I absolutely love Rust in Peace. But Countdown to Extinction is Countdown to Extinction, and that's the album I got into Megadeth with. So I've got a personal attachment to that.
this is actually the age difference that we have. Like we have 2 or 3 years age difference. And
Yeah,
like for example, for me, my first Anthrax album was Persistence of Time. My first
yeah.
Megadeth album was Rust in Peace. So for me, the favorite albums are
Couple of years
those
difference there.
rather than yeah. Um, According to Zoom, we have 3 minutes left. So I would like to ask you, how do you see the future of art?
You
What
mean right
what would
now?
you want to achieve with art further? I
Well,
mean,
yeah, I don't think I'm done. Like, I still want to make more records. As I sit here, I don't know what the next record's about. Quite a lot of people ask me, but is it some kind of trilogy or what? No, I don't know. It'll be about Northumbria because it has to be about Northumbria or it's not art. But yeah, I think that there are one or two things that I might like to experiment with in terms of elements of the sound. But you know, I'm pretty happy with how it sounds. And to me, that might sound like a sort of almost an arrogant thing to say, but I'm genuinely making it for my own personal satisfaction. And the fact that other people, particularly people who aren't from Northumbria, as of course most Arth fans aren't, the
yeah.
fact that the fact that they're finding some soul in this, and it's touching something, you know, I think is really beautiful. So yeah, there will be more at some point, but it's a lot of work to make an Arth record. So we'll see, because I do it all.
All right. Well, I wish you the best with the
Thank you
band
very
and
much.
with everything else you're doing. Thank you very much for doing this interview.
You're very welcome.
And it was very
There's a
nice
new
talking to you.
Winterfeld record as well to come out this year as well. So
Oh,
a
great.
new Winterfeld record in September. So that's all done and ready to go. So you'll be hearing music from that very soon.
All right. Well, it's nice to hear. I'd like to listen to new Winterfillers, of course.
Thank you very much.
So thank you again and take care. Talk to you soon,
Thank
I
you, my
hope.
friend. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.